Hello everyone, Floppy Waffle 69 here, and welcome back to the channel, guys. Today we will be continuing our Down the Line series, this time talking about the Tier 9 tech tree battleship for the Italians. This is the Lepanto. And what do I think about the Lepanto? I think it's pretty much dog shit. Now, why do I think the Lepanto... Okay, first of all, let me catch myself, because this has been a couple takes of me trying to talk in coherent sentences, because I have a lot of thoughts in my mind about this ship, and this is where it all kind of boils down. You know, usually I would say this for the Cristoforo Colombo review at the tier 10, but I figured I need to state this now. Before I talk about the Lepanto, I need to talk about this line in its entirety. I will acknowledge that I do believe this line should not be a first-line BB grind for new-to-play players. Now, why do I believe that? Well, one, there's some mechanics that you need to understand a little bit more to really get the most out of this ship. And two, the grind up to the Cristoforo Colombo is atrocious. From one of the ships, from all the ships that I featured already on this Down the Line series, I really try to shed some light on why I think some of these ships are not as bad as people say they are. But then, to the vast majority of players, I do understand where the frustrations come from. So I guess I can understand that why the vast majority of the community thinks these ships are dog shit. Now, these ships have the potential to be good, and actually, matter of fact, they have all the tools to be good, but the execution of what the ship does and how it does it, game by game, you know, salvo by salvo, not to spoil too much, it's just very painful. And I think it really comes out here on the Lepanto, and you really are going to see that. Now, again, just like the Vittorio Veneto down at Tier 8, we expressed that the ship really isn't that bad. It just finds itself at a tier that, Tier 8 usually gets up-tiered into Tier 10 a lot, especially if not Tier 10 and Tier 9s. And I think the Lepanto suffers from something very similar. Both these ships, in my opinion, aren't inherently terrible ships. They just, with what they have, like statistic-wise, on their vessel and how their ship executes it in battle, is nothing short of a disaster. And it really does fluctuate by the matchmaker. So these ships are very much matchmaker dependent, and it does fluctuate depending on the RNG rolls. You know, one salvo, two salvos in a row, you'll get double ones. Your salvos will go nowhere where you want them to go, and then with the third or fourth salvo, you'll actually, the stars will align, and you'll land, actually a decent amount of shells on target, doing catastrophic amounts of damage. But it's not very common, is what I'm trying to illustrate to you. So when I go through this Down the Line series, well, not this series, but when I'm going through this ship review, just take it with a pinch of salt in what I'm trying to express and what I'm trying to talk about. Because at the end of the day, all of us can be ship tool wizards. We can all go on ship tool. We can all read all these stats, and it's like, oh, it doesn't seem that bad. Look at the DPM. Look at this. Oh, it looks really good. But how the actually translates into game, it's a whole different story, right? It's a whole completely different story. And that's really what I want you guys to get out of this video. And whoever stumbles across this video from, a month from now, from on release date, from a year from now, that's why I make these Down the Line series. So you can go, if you stumble across these, and you're kind of struggling about going down this corresponding line, or, on the fence whether or not to grind this corresponding line next. That's what I'm trying to do with these videos. I'm really trying to take it by a tier basis and really break down these ships for you viewers at home. So without further ado, guys, let's get on into the actual port analysis section of the video. Okay, so we finally crossed the bridge over from the Veneto, and we have now arrived here at the Tier 9 Lepanto, and a lot of us are hopeful and optimistic that we are finally going to be getting a ship that is worth that grind. But I hate to be the bearer of bad news, guys, but this is just not the ship, not yet. You still have to go one more ship. You get past this ship, and then I promise you, it is well worth the grind. But again, for a lot of us free-to-play players, the grind is very grindy. A lot of us aren't sitting on a shit ton of blue boosters, a lot of premium ships. You know, we're just kind of taking tech line or tech tree ships out there, and we're just hoping we're just grinding away with potentially gray boosters or even no boosters at all. And I tell you what, guys, this is one of these lines that I would hate to play 60 games in my Lepanto. Or I'm sure it's not that many, but you know what I'm trying to say. 60 games in Lepanto, and it's like, oh my God, finally I have enough research points, or whatever. I can go ahead and research, or experience, sorry, I can go ahead and research Lepanto. It is a very painful ship to play. Again, good games can happen with this ship, but again, the stars have to align for this ship really to shine via the matchmaker. And again, with RNG. So let's start off with the armor layout of the ship, which again, this is definitely not a negative on the Lepanto. I do find the armor scheme of these Italian BBs pretty nice. It's almost borderline Soviet BB levels of armor. Again, when I say borderline, obviously I still have to tip my hat to the Soviets. They are just vastly superior. But again, building upon the premise of if you show broadside, you can get punished. And again, if you angle your armor correctly, you can ricochet a lot of large caliber armor piercing. And there is some HE splash immunity or penetration immunity out there on via the deck armor and sides. And we're going to go ahead and highlight that now. 32 millimeter nose. We have a 32 millimeter ass with a deck armor of 55 millimeters, which is very, very nice, guys. This also is going to prevent a lot of large caliber overmatching armor piercing. Not that battleships really have to worry about that, only from 460s and higher. But again, 55 millimeters, that's awesome. That's two thumbs way up high. And again, that's also going to give us some immunity with larger caliber HE shattering as well. One thing to note, the one drawback of this armor thickness on the deck is going to be AP dive bombers. They will eat you alive with that. That is more than enough armor to go ahead and fuse and penetrate essentially and detonate with inside your citadel, because again, like we're dealing with Richthofens or I don't even know what another Hakuruyus, like those style of ships, like yeah, they're gonna eat this thing up. Okay, also to mention a little bit of a spoiler here, your AA not that impressive. Okay. Going into actually what this ship has in regards of a citadel, if we look, we do have an exposed citadel, but there is something to keep note here, and these are these kind of armored deck slopes. 25 millimeters is not bad, or is not bad at all. Again, we look at some armored sections, kind of like a little bit of a really sloped, almost like a turtleback style-ish of citadel plating. Again, don't pay too much mind into this because you only have the 25 millimeter deck slopes. That coupled with about 350 millimeters of effective armor, 25 millimeters of armor can get overmatched by 381 millimeter guns. So if they are in close enough and have enough pen on your flat broadside, guess what will happen? They will go ahead and bypass your armored deck slopes, and right now, go ahead and citadel you completely right there, which the citadel is above the waterline. So these ships are not citadel proof. They can get away with some kind of interesting maneuvers. If you want a full game return in front of a battleship, you have a chance to eat a citadel depending on penetration and all that kind of stuff, but more often than not, you're actually going to find yourself just eating raw chunk damage rather than a citadel. It all depends on the shell coming in from you, at what degree, what angle, and from what ship is shooting it. Going into the artillery of the Lepanto, this is the 3x4 381 millimeter gun. So right off the get-go, we have to understand that this large caliber armor piercing of the 381 millimeter gun variant can go ahead and overmatch 25 millimeters of effective armor. Now the reload is 32.6 seconds, which is just shy of 33 seconds. Again, you have that minimum shell type switching time, like expert loader, baked into the vessel at 22.8 seconds, which is quite nice. 180-degree turn time of 34.5 seconds, and again, a maximum range of 18.1. Couple things to note here with the Lepanto. One thing is that your turret firing angles aren't necessarily that good. The rear turret does struggle every now and then to get to bearing if you are going forward. I believe, what is it, 38 degrees? I could be wrong on that. I will go ahead and flash up a symbol here or a diagram here so you can go ahead and check that out. And then another thing to keep in mind is you have a horrendous sigma value of 1.6. Now, to put that in perspective, we already talked about on this channel in copious amounts of detail what sigma is, but to compare it to some other ships in the game currently, that I guess to kind of show you what a good sigma value is and what a ship that doesn't necessarily have a good sigma value is but can still reliably land on target, you have the Iowa with a sigma value of 1.9, known for its accuracy, I guess, more often than not. 1.9, pretty good. And then the Los Andes at 1.7. Nothing can still schwack here and there too and reliably land some armor piercing where it needs to go. Lepanto has 1.6. And again, we've talked about in discussion why these ships have that sigma value and kind of shotgunny-esque dispersion. Because these ships give up so much in order to get that kind of one-trick pony shell known as semi-armor piercing on a large caliber gun. That is why you are giving up the accuracy and consistency, because if you hit, the damage will be or should be catastrophic depending on if you can go ahead and penetrate that target. I believe the minimum threshold millimeters of penetration that the SAP does have is 96 millimeters. Again, should be pending the vast majority of things. This isn't low tier around the Dreadnought era anymore. These armor platings are a little bit more fine and universal. So as long as you are familiar with certain nations, you should be fine with knowing who you can and can't pen based upon armor schemes. Okay. In the last video, I talked about kind of the general rule of thumb where you should be aiming. We should be putting that reticle line right here, right where the deck meets, right where the upper belt meets the deck. That's going to give us the best chance at success. We really don't want to be aiming here, especially against enemy battleships, as this is the main armor belt. And since my SAP can only penetrate 96 millimeters and can't penetrate 350 millimeters, you can see where a lot of confusion comes to some players that aren't really familiar with the characteristics of SAP. Survivability, 75,900 HP with a torpedo protection damage reduction of actually 47%, which isn't that bad actually, and that will come into play later on in the video when you see the reviews. These things can, or at least the Lepanto can get away with eating a couple torpedoes here and there. Again, it depends on what torpedoes you're hitting. I believe in my review or my replay that I'm going to be showcasing, I eat 2 Nanning torpedoes, which are huge damage dealing torpedoes. I believe they only fall short of like St. Vincent torpedoes in regards to the maximum alpha strike potential on those torps. And I actually end up living from that too. And that's towards the end of the battle where I've already traded a shit ton of HP also. So it is nice having a little bit of a get out of jail free card here and there with 47% torpedo belt reduction. Plus again, that's factoring in towards torpedo bombers and towards submarines. So it's going to help alleviate some of those issues as well. Going back into the artillery, just want to quickly note on the semi-armor piercing. We already talked about 96 millimeters of effective armor penetration capacity on the semi-armor piercing. Again, the maximum damage is 12,500. And again, going to the AP, it is just 12,000 base. The SAP is going to be a little bit faster coming out of the barrels at 880 meters a second, while the initial velocity coming from the armor piercing coming from the barrels is 850 meters a second. Again, I've talked about the secondaries on these ships, probably all the way down at tiers 6. These ships are coated in a 90 millimeter secondary. So if you look at the secondary DPM of these ships on Ship Tool, you're going to be like, wow, that actually looks really enticing. Why am I not speccing secondaries into this thing? Well, it comes down to the 90 millimeter secondaries penetration threshold. They can only penetrate 15 millimeters of armor. And if you invest the IFHE skill, I believe you're only pushing, is it 18, 19-ish? It really doesn't justify it, to spec all that into it just to get even a chance at panning. Plus, you're cutting your fire chance down in half. It really doesn't justify taking secondaries on this ship. Yes, you're good for the occasional fire on these secondaries, but then again, I mean, your 90 millimeter secondaries are only going to be having a 5% chance to start a fire and reloading in 4 seconds. The good secondaries on this ship, which you have a little bit less than, you have 6x3 152 millimeter guns. These have a 7% chance of fire and can go ahead and penetrate 25 millimeters of armor. Again, these secondaries really are only good, generically speaking, against destroyers and cruisers. Against enemy battleships, which again, you most likely will be brawling, if you are in a brawling style of battleship, you're only going to be relying solely on fire set or superstructure hits. Other than that, guys, you're going to be doing next to nada with your secondaries. So again, I cannot stress this enough. These are not secondary battleships. Do not spec into these secondaries, please. Moving into the maneuverability, 29.5 knots with a turning circle radius of 910 meters and a rudder shift time of 12 seconds. Now, again, these are alternative builds that I've tried. I've tried with the damage control and I've tried with the steering gears. I'm a little bit on the fence, a little bit indifferent between the two. I've taken the steering gears because I want to get my third turret into the fray a little bit more. But I think generally speaking, one I really can recommend is the damage. You're always going to have to be managing your damage, your fires and floods a little bit better. So that's why I would go ahead and recommend that one. I think you can never go wrong if you opt to take your damage, like damage mitigation, right? And especially in a battleship, that's one of our main concerns. We want to make sure that we're in the fight long while we're trading that HP, while we're tanking for our team. That's why I go ahead and recommend speccing that skill. If you do not find it an issue, then by all means, the rudder shift is a great tool that can help you with swiveling your third turret out into the fray. Okay. And then finally for the concealment, I believe with the concealment skill upgraded, you get it down to 14.9, and then with the commander, you get it down to 13.4, which is actually quite nice. Keep in mind as well that you do have a 15.8 kilometer smoke firing detect penalty. So please don't be that Italian battleship player that smokes up, thinks you're immune, and fires your guns. Really brain dead. Basically brain dead. Do not do that. Okay. And that is the one thing I talked about the last episode in the Veneto. The Veneto picked up finally this exhaust smoke generator on these Italian BBs. I already went into great detail on what I believe or how I believe these smoke screens to be utilized. These are not offensive smokes. These are kind of get out of jail free cards. These are disengagement smokes. That is how they're intended to be used. I very rarely ever, if at all, use these as an offensive smoke. Sometimes I'll smoke up, fall off the radar, wait for the enemy to kind of, be out of sight, out of mind for me, and then I'll go ahead and open up on their broadside. Like, I have done that. I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. I'm just speaking, again, with generally speaking, probably not what you want to be doing. You really have to read the minimap, read the scenario, and plan accordingly based upon what you see in front of you. That's like the big thing with these ships. Okay, you have a standard heel and you have the spotter or fighter. Again, you're going to want to take the spotter. But now again, with the patrol fighter buff, it wouldn't be a bad idea to consider it now. For me though, I think universally speaking, the spotter you're going to find more use out of than you would the patrol fighters. All right, so that wraps up our support analysis on the Lepanto. I think it's about time we go ahead and showcase some gameplay in this bitch. Let's go on into the gameplay and check it out. All right, and here we are in battle with our Tier 9 Italian battleship. This absolute behemoth of a battleship. All right, so I'm going to have to apologize right out of the get-go here, and I will have to state this is not the best game. Mistakes were made. But I figured this video or replay showed a lot of the pros and the cons of this ship and really allows you as the player to kind of see what the package is and what the average player or so, maybe slightly above average player, can achieve in the Lepanto. Again, we have our generalized battleship ideology, which is we want to sail up and support our allies with main battery fire. We want to tank for our team, sometimes showcasing sort of an enticing angle to some ships, again, while angling our armor effectively to mitigate that damage. But again, being up in the fray, not just letting our cruisers be, take a beating, supporting our ships. And that's what we really want to do. And again, of course, shooting enemy destroyers. But about shooting enemy destroyers, I'm still going to stand by this. I don't care how inaccurate your battleship is. I still think you should make an attempt to shoot enemy destroyers, because that's still 1,000 to 3,000 damage per salvo that, less that an allied DD has to do that you've done for it now, right? 2,500 damage there on the Nanning. There we go. That's 2,500 less damage that our DD has to theoretically do in order to kill that ship. That's the thought process there. And I can go ahead and turn out because I see the enemy Roussillon, I think it's what's at enemy Atlanta, and the enemy battleships from B flank are coming to our flank here. So angling out, not a bad idea. But again, we catch ourselves because we are going a little bit too far out here, and we are going to eventually regroup and re-engage. This was just the initial salvo. I wanted to get a salvo off, potentially on a destroyer, and I already did. So there we go. Again, now I'm kind of in that, like, okay, spot the targets mentality. Let me start lighting them up. That's kind of what I'm thinking about. I'm going to slow down here, go half speed, stay in this pre-kited position, just kind of be a menace on this flank. Now, it's good to see the Roussillon because I know the Roussillon is coated in 32 millimeters of effective armor, which means that my semi-armor piercing should have no problem dealing with him. But again, the big problem with this ship, we've seen with other ships in this line, is that it's not very accurate. And even when you are landing shells on the target, they're not landing where the shells can penetrate. I swear to God, I can't make this up, guys. And maybe you found this out too. Even if I land 5 shells on the target, 2 of them penetrate because they hit superstructure or a portion of the ship that can actually penetrate it. And the rest of them hit like turrets, belt armor. It's a mess, okay? And that's kind of what I want to, show you as the viewer there, and kind of what I'm trying to express to you with not only this line, but a review of this ship completely. We've picked up guns, right? We had 9 guns on the tier 8. Now we have 12. You're thinking, dude, more shells equals a higher chance of me landing shells on target. And that's usually the general ideology of what I believe. But something with these ships, with the Sigma value, or, at this tier, 1.6 Sigma, and horrendous dispersion, you get a shotgun that is like, my God, this is the Italian shotgun. This is crazy. It really is painful when it comes to the main battery on this ship. And again, you're seeing that, even when we're towards our maximum range here, you can see that we're struggling to land shells on target because our Sigma value is 1.6 and our ellipse is just so big that even when we can theoretically hit the target, our shells are going well below, well above, because that ellipse is just so big. And again, 1.6, Sigma value rating, it's not very good. So there's really no consistency at all with these guns. Matter of fact, I've quoted this entire down the line series. The only thing consistent about these Italian BBs is the lack of consistency of the main battery. And I stand by that statement, and I will continuously stand by that statement. What is the general idea, or how do I try to play this ship? Okay. I try to keep moving, and I try to keep my third turret into the battle as much as I possibly can. And now, why do I do this? Well, because I don't trust my ship to have a game impact at all. Like, I'm talking any game impact at all if I just use my front 2 guns. So that's why I'm trying to use all 3 of my turrets, constantly be kiting, constantly be maneuvering. That is my main idea. Okay? And then, with that, it allows me to theoretically, because I have 12 shells going down range, land more shells on the target. Okay, so far it has worked out for me. But again, as you can see, how many salvos have I fired this game? 7, 8, and I'm only sitting at 36,000 damage. I wouldn't, be mad if you confused this. Like, I thought this was the Cristoforo Colombo line. I thought that ship is broken. That ship is so strong. That thing nukes me for 20,000 a pop. Why? So the Lepanto has to be able to do the same thing. Wrong again. The grind of these ships is not good. It's not fun. And a lot of people don't like these ships. A lot of senior level, Unicoms and super Unicoms don't like the Lepanto because the guns are just so frustrating. And especially on the battlefield, what do you want? You want consistency out of your main battery guns. And if you're not going to have consistency, you better damn sure make up for it in other ways, right? Via a secondary battery being improved, your armor being insanely high, super heal, something. It doesn't have any of that. Well, matter of fact, not that it doesn't have any of that. It has an exhaust smoke, but I think the exhaust smoke is more of a double-edged sword on this thing. And I figure that the vast majority of the players, especially on the NA server, just utilize this smoke screen wrong, which is why I really don't consider it to be like part of its package. Like, no one's sitting here going, wow, you know what? The Italian battleship's gimmick, which is the fuel exhaust smoke and sap, is just a really dangerous combo. Because it's like, it doesn't really complement the play style of the ship. So what you're essentially saying is, hey, we had this idea, we slapped it on the Venezia, so now fuck it, because it's Italian, we're going to slap it on Italian BBs. That's essentially what Wargaming did. And I don't really like it. Now, if you're a secondary brawling cruiser like we see, or not cruiser, sorry, if you're secondary brawling battleship like we see, I guess they wanted to make like the Sicilia, and I guess the Giuseppe were like they're intended at, hey, this is going to be kind of our secondary brawlers for the Italians. Having a fuel exhaust smoke, yeah, I could see it. It's part of the package. It's part of the gimmick. Understandable. But on your standard battleships who want to utilize their main battery with a smoke firing penalty in the 15-kilometer range, like, no, it doesn't really make much sense, right? And that's why. And sorry if I'm sounding kind of like a broken record. Sorry if I'm kind of going on a little bit of a rant here. But yeah, I think the overall design of the Italian BB line is flawed. And it's a little bit frustrating because at the end of the day, guys, and this is the one question you have to ask yourself, how do you balance an ammunition type that has 96 millimeters of effective penetration and it can nuke you every 33 seconds, right? How do you balance that in this game? I guess it's very inaccurate, longer reloads. Well, yeah, this thing checks both those boxes. Is this ship balanced? You know, and that's the big question. That's like the end all be all question. Is the Lepanto balanced? Well, I can assure you the Cristoforo Colombo is not. 16 guns, ledge mod, makes it more accurate. That thing ain't balanced. I guess if we're going off those standards and those guidelines, yeah, we could say the Lepanto's balanced. But over its average win rate per, like, on the server, for how players do in her, that coupled with her potential, you don't really see her in competitive play. I don't know. That's the question I'm asking you. Is the Lepanto balanced? Is it underpowered? Is it overpowered? Well, I can assure you it's not overpowered. Okay, on the stat sheet side of things, yes. If you're reading ship tool, the thing looks cracked. It looks like an incredibly good ship, and it looks like an incredibly good package, and it should be an awesome ship. The fact of the matter is, like I mentioned in the port analysis, the ship's stats don't transfer well in game, and especially in the meta. And it just doesn't really do a whole lot of anything. For battleships that are all about tanking damage and dishing out damage, this thing really only tanks damage. It really doesn't dish out the paint. Even if it's a tier 9 high, tier 9 BB, I just would find myself, I'd rather be playing other tier 9 BBs. And that's kind of the big thing that I want to stress here with this ship. This ship, in my opinion, could use some love. It could. How to balance it? That is the question that I think is over my head, because you can't really improve the accuracy too much, because then you're going to get like the Cristoforo Colombo problem. So again, it's one of those things that you kind of hope they do something to the ship, but just don't touch the things of the ship that I guess most people want and miss on the ship. I just don't know. It's one of those things, right? Whew. All right. The Lepanto. Where do I find the most success with this ship? Anywhere between the 13 to 15 kilometer range. That is where I want to stay. I want to be staying active. I want to be maneuvering. And again, if I find myself getting too hot or too deep or knee deep into the enemy's crossfires, or I'm just like, I am the target, everyone's focusing on me, that's when I go ahead, shoot my guns, wait 20 seconds, and then pop my fuel exhaust smoke and just hightail it out of there. That's where I find success. Kind of that hit and run stylish sort of play style. That's where I get the most out of my Lepanto and actually find moderate success with the ship. Using armor piercing as well. Obviously, sadly, this game, I never got a chance to do it. Could I have done it on the Neptune broadside? Absolutely. But I wanted to catch that Neptune with his pants down. One salvo I did, the other salvo not so much. So I didn't know if I had time to go ahead and switch to the armor piercing. So that's why I went and stuck with the semi-armor piercing. One thing that this game doesn't show is the success you can have if you switch via the armor piercing and semi-armor piercing. Just like I've done previously in the other reviews, you have to make sure you utilize both ammunition choices. Don't be a fucking retard like I am here and stick with only semi-armor piercing, because it's easy, yes, but again, I think you can just do better, like, overall damage than you would be just sticking with semi-armor piercing. I think you're a little bit of an opportunistic ship. I think there are times, because your AP is so good with the pen and the shell velocity, and by like the impact angle of your ship, especially at the ranges of that 13 to 15 kilometer range, that I think armor piercing is the ammunition choice of type. Again, when you're running into those super light cruisers, the Atlanta, the Neptune, yeah, staying with semi-armor piercing, not a bad idea. But especially against enemy battleships too, really, the armor piercing really does shine, and I highly recommend you guys tab that 2 key and watch it do wonders. That is my big advice I can give you out there, okay? My final thoughts on this ship, guys. I want to love this ship from the aesthetic standpoint, from the play style, from the line standpoint style. It's just not it. This ship needs is in dire need of some help, and I would love it if Wargaming buffed the ship just a little bit. Just give us a little bit of something, because right now in the current state of how this ship is, it is not very fun to play, and it is making the grind that much worse, especially now because you're at tier 9 in this line, right? Here's the post-battle screen, guys. Wasn't that good of a game, but hey, again, it showed a lot of the pros and the cons of this vessel. I hope you enjoyed this little hot take review of the Lepanto, and I will catch you all in the next one. Have a good rest of your day, guys. Peace out.